Unit 6, what challenges might face American constitutional democracy in the 21st century? We have chosen question number 1, which is why does the United States commitment to the rule of law appeal to other peoples? How would you explain the meaning of the rule of law? How do America's founding documents express the nation's commitment to the rule of law? You may begin.
According to Supremacy Clause in Article 6, Section 2, this Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. Rule of law establishes that no person under the United States Constitution is above or below the law, creating equality among citizens along with the 3 branches of government. The United States Constitution was established during the Enlightenment, in which John Locke's ideas of a social contract inspired colonists to establish a system in which people were willingly to give up rights for security and government. It also established the rule of law's idea of equality through the phrase, all men are created equal.
The rule of law has 3 different interpretations. In one interpretation, the term means rule according to law. This means no individual can be ordered by the government to pay civil damages or suffer criminal punishment except in strict accordance with well-established and clearly defined laws and procedures. In Powell v. Alabama, 9 African Americans were accused of raping 2 Caucasian women, and Alabama officials sprinted through 3 trials in one day. This was a direct violation of the due process rights.
The second interpretation is rule under law, meaning no branch of government is above the law and no public official may act arbitrarily or unilaterally outside of the law. In the Watergate scandal, rule of law was upheld in United States v. Nixon when the Supreme Court ruled that even the president is not above the law. In this context, it also means that no one citizen is above any other citizen.
An example of this is the 15th Amendment, which states that the right to vote should not be abridged by race, color, or previous servitude. Conversely, congressional insider trading allowed for elected officials to buy or sell securities based on information gained on the job, but was recently banned by the Stock Act.
Lastly, the term means rule according to a higher law, which means the government cannot enforce any written law unless it conforms to universal principles of fairness, morality, and justice. This can be seen with Supreme Court case Loving v. Virginia, where the court ruled that they could not deny marriage based on race, mirroring the moral and social changes that had begun at the time.
The expectation of equality is not protected in other nations, however. In the Middle East, specifically in Afghanistan, the Taliban established an oppressive regime which administers cruel public punishment, limits women's education, and prevents access to the free market of ideas. This can be seen in recent events in which a young Pakistani girl was shot after advocating for women's education.
People under a government that lacks rule of law often desire equality and rights, so they look to the United States system as an example. This can be seen in documents of other nations where our Declaration of Independence is apparent. In France's Declaration of Rights in 1789, key phrases such as inalienable and sacred rights of man and free communication demonstrate inspiration from the United States Constitution.
Through the rule of law, power is divided, allowing citizens to have power, make changes, and ultimately hold the government accountable with specific laws and rules they must adhere to. The United States' commitment to the rule of law is seen through constant edits, additions, and occasional abandonments of documents such as the Articles of Confederation.
In the Declaration of Independence, commitment to the rule of law was seen in the list of grievances, when the colonists were willing to call out their king in order to escape from a tyrannical leader and form a better society. The 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights states that powers not delegated by the Constitution are reserved to the states or people. Through this, the rule under law is being upheld because it ensures that the Constitution is a law of land and that the government power is not above the citizens in making laws and establishing powers, protecting equality.
The preamble to the Constitution begins with the phrase, "we, the people." It was not a dictator or king claiming divine right, but the people that ensured justice, domestic tranquility, and secured the blessings of liberty. Society is not perfect, making our Constitution imperfect. However, history has shown that our system, by enforcing rule of law, has the capability to improve along with society, as stated in Federalist 51. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll wait some cross-examination questions for you as follow-up. Let me ask you this. If we have such a commitment to the rule of law in the United States, how do we justify holding prisoners without trial or giving them other rights in Guantanamo Bay, similar I would say that to what the British did in hauling colonists to Nova Scotia for trial.
Well, under the Supreme Court case Zadi Voss versus United States and Wing Long versus United States, it established that any citizen or any person that is within the United States during a crime, whether they are committed of terrorism or not, are subject to their due process rights. And so these Supreme Court cases show that the idea of Guantanamo Bay is not according to the rule of law, thus making it unconstitutional.
Further, our Constitution, when saying that you have equal protection under the law, does not state that citizens do. It states that all people, which in many ways does question this. However, it may be necessary for the defense of our nation. Congress has the power, in order to defend our nation, to do anything necessary and proper under Article 1, Section 8, and this may be found necessary and proper in order to protect our nation.
In addition, Article 4 guarantees that the federal government will protect a republican form of government and protect the states from invasion and from domestic violence, which helps them justify keeping these prisoners without their due process rights.
Your testimony hasn't really touched on checks and balances too much. So how does checks and balances fit into the rule of law?
As stated in Federalist 51, Madison states that we cannot rely on the virtue of human nature to protect us from government. And so our system has checks and balances, such as Congress can pass laws, yet citizens have the right to question those and use litigation to adhere to the Supreme Court to question Congress's decisions.
Another way that we can see checks and balances is with our amendment process. There's different requirements that are needed in order for an amendment to be passed, such as 2/3 of each of the houses, which is a check on both of the houses within side of Congress itself, and then also there's a 3/4 of the states have to approve a check.
Also, our Constitution gives the people the power and the freedom to check on the government, and this was definitely seen during the Civil Rights Movement.
In addition, we can see that Congress has the power of congressional oversight, in which they can check into the actions of the executive branch to ensure that they aren't overstepping their powers.
And lastly, in sum, the checks and balances idea also advocates for a rule of law because, as stated in Federalist 51, it protects against a double security. So while there are checks and balances within the government, as Katya had mentioned, the people are one of the greatest checks against the government, which would ultimately prevent the federal government from going above the rule of law.
Distinguish between the rule of man and the rule of law.
The rule of man is basically advocating for a man who can make whatever law he wants without having to abide by other principles or morals. Under the rule of law, this means that there's a rule that people have to abide by and have to adhere to.
You can see this currently with President Morsi in Egypt creating a constitution basically without the consent of the people. This shows that he could potentially move towards rule of man rather than rule of law. The people there want rule of law, which means that he has to adhere to a constitution made with him and the people. However, him keeping the people out of this process creates rule of man rather than rule of law.
Another example of that is in Sudan, when Sudan's president acts above the other people, violating rule of law. Recently, there have been 5 people killed in this past week, and they were protesting their government, and he killed them, which shows that he is above the rule of law.
And it's amazing how our Constitution is a pyramid made of laws, and it's ruled by laws instead of ruled by men.
Thank you. Tell me this, in Egypt, you use that already as an example. Let me ask you about that a little bit more. This is a country that 18 months ago fought for its freedom, overturning a dictator, but then it took them 18 months to actually put something in writing into effect. Do you think you can have the rule of law without something in writing?
Yes, you can have the idea of rule of law without something in writing. This is called an unwritten constitution, which can be seen in multiple places, specifically the most famous, Great Britain and Australia. This ultimately means that while there isn't specific written out laws, there's a huge portion of laws that the government or parliament has to abide by.
Further, our Constitution was written almost during a perfect storm. There was the Enlightenment going on. There was the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention were described as demigods. And this can't be replicated anywhere. And so some nations have defaulted to an unwritten constitution, such as Israel, which is a nation with religious tolerance in many things and many freedoms. So you can have a limited government without a written constitution.
Thank you.
I really like the way you bolstered your cases, with reference to the various articles and things, and I really appreciate that. Being a rookie at this as a judge, I'm a little uncomfortable with bringing in some of the contemporary issues like, Sudan or Egypt and so forth. And again, I'll bow to others on that, but I'm a little bit uneasy about that, but thank you.
Very well prepared again, great eye contact, well prepared. Some nervousness, but not too much really. And that may be more difficult on Saturday, but that's why we're here tonight, so that's okay. Great examples on all the questions, which I wasn't really expecting, maybe because I just don't know it as well as you do, which is entirely reasonable. So that helped my understanding of it, and I thought you did real well with that.
I too, I thought you did a really good job. The first question I asked right off the bat kind of stumped you for about a half a second, but you all worked very well together. It's very hard to have a group of 5 and get through a lot of questions. And the only thing I might suggest is, in listening to each other, decide whether it's really important to add one more point or whether it's really more important to get to another question. That's a tough thing to balance. And you still got through 4 questions. I thought you did well with that. I was surprised actually that we got through 4 questions, so I give you a lot of credit for that. A lot of good examples. I think if you can, since I have been doing this a little bit longer, I guess I'll add something to one of my colleagues. I think if you can relate it to modern examples, things that are happening in the world today, because I kind of took you there on the very first question. If you can do that, then you show the judges that not only do you understand the material, but that you can apply it to the news and to current events, and judges really do appreciate that. Be careful. There's 2 things I would be careful. One is language. Brent, you use the word huge. Or no, actually, I think it was actually Isabel used huge. And huge is one of those kind of meaningless words, because it doesn't really stand for anything. So, you might be a little more careful in your language is the only thing. And the other thing is, I know that you guys have your papers turned over, but you all keep looking down at them. And you're going to make the judges wonder whether you've actually turned over your papers or not. And so I might suggest you just put them on the floor. Then you won't, during cross-examination, because you're not allowed to look at your papers during cross-ex. So put them on the floor, and then you won't have that temptation. And Richard, with your permission, I'm going to take 30 seconds since I have to leave.
That's fine.
For all of you, is that I will tell you, doing this for 9 years, which is half of what Dan has done it for, one of the comments